Recently I made a video covering whether Timeskip was carried by nostalgia or if it was really that good, and if you want to find the answer to that, I'm going to put it up in the cards so you guys can go watch that video and find out what my opinions are on it. But as I said at the end of the video, I will be covering post-Timeskip, and that is what we are here for today. So strap in, because I'm going to get real in depth with this one just like I got real in depth with the Timeskip one. But before I start the video, if you guys like this type of content, you guys know what to do. Hit the like button and subscribe, as I do post content like this regularly, and to be honest, it is a win-win. You guys show support and I'll give it back to you guys in videos. Whether it's One Piece, other anime, or just fiction in general, in due time I'm going to cover it, so be there when I go there. But I feel like that's enough of my rambling. Why don't I get into the video and truly find out whether Timeskip is overhated or overrated. So just like last time, I'm going to start with the rules, and the rules are pretty simple. How I rank these arcs will be very simple. It will be on how I enjoy it, the writing, and if the arc has a lasting effect upon the series. The second rule is if there's like a saga going on, like the same way I did the Marineford saga, I'm going to put that as 1, but obviously I don't think there are too many ones in post-Timeskip, as a lot of the arcs are just very like bang bang bang. I know it's part of the Yonko saga, but they're not really like an ongoing arc, if that makes sense. With that being said, I think the rules are done, so let's get into the video and start off with Fishman Island. Now, I know you heard me say Fishman Island when Return to Sabody is right there, but as I said before, I'm going to conjoin it onto one arc so it makes it a lot more simple and easier for me to do. Return to Sabody was okay. Like, there's nothing for me to say, oh yes it was great, but there's nothing for me to say, oh yes it was terrible. Like, it was just an arc. Like, it's a mid arc, not in a rude way, but it's just a mid arc. There isn't anything for me to poke holes at. There isn't anything for me to say, oh yes, it's the greatest. I do like the interaction with the Straw Hats though. I like when Zoro got lost, and obviously of Zoro and Sanji arguing straight away. Like, they just met again in that argument. Yeah, overall was what it was meant to be, just a short arc just to push us into Fishman Island. And so now I'm going to segue into Fishman Island. Now, Fishman Island is an arc that everybody looks upon and has different opinions on it, because they either love it or they hate it. I think there are a lot less people that love it, because we will think of the arc for very few things, and the few things aren't good. But before I get into the negatives, I want to get into the positives. Learning about the Sun Pirates is probably the best thing about this arc, and just Queen Otohime. Like, those two things is what carries Fishman Island. Is we get a lot of lore, and we get just a lot of deep characters, and we get to see how fishermen face oppression in the One Piece verse, but then we get to see how it then affects the people that haven't done anything. These are all great things that Fishman Island does well. Like, don't get me wrong, it's older, he's gonna do character stories perfectly, but everything else about the arc, it just doesn't mesh well with me. Now, my first watch through, I thought the arc was very slow and boring, and then when I read it, I didn't feel any different. I thought it was slow, but I think because it's the manga, it just went a little bit faster. But there wasn't anything like too great about the pacing. Hody wasn't a gripping villain in my opinion. Like, you could have given that role to somebody else and they would have been more gripping, or you could just add more on to Hody and I would have been more involved. But I don't know, I think in my opinion it was the strength of Hody. Now, I know a lot of people are like, oh, but it's not enough now. Okay, listen, the strength of a villain does give you more like of a reason to be involved, and he wasn't anything impressive, so I didn't really see him as a gripping villain. I expect them to be strong, I expect them to have that writing to back it up, but he didn't have that. His lackeys were kind of mid. Like, there wasn't anything for me to say, oh yeah, no, it was an outstanding arc. Like, the arc overall, in my opinion, as I just said about Return to Sabody, was mid, and because of the low points in the arc, and like, okay, I know I'm a Sanji fan, so it's gonna sound kind of salty, but I feel like the overusage of the gag, annoying and overused, and that's something that everybody can agree upon, even if you're a Sanji fan or not. Yeah, the gag was very overused, and just, I don't know, it just soured the arc for me, because there's a lot of things the arc does. It's just very slow paced, but the writing was good. Don't get me wrong, the writing of Fishman Island was phenomenal, but everything else just wasn't up to par. I will say that the lasting effects of the arc does carry through throughout the story, but I mean, that's really about it. The enjoyment factor of this arc was not there. And so because of that, I'm going to give Return to Sabody and Fishman Island a 5.5 out of 10. Moving on from those two arcs, why don't we go into Punk Hazard? Now, Punk Hazard did include less things overall. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, the substance that we got in Fishman Island was way better than we got in Punk Hazard, but I feel like the character interactions in Punk Hazard and the reveals that we get here is a little bit better. But with that being said, the overall writing just doesn't feel as potent as it did in Fishman Island or even the arcs after. It just felt like a filler arc in my opinion. But then again, the characters that get added to the cast and what we find out on this arc is it's good. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, like, Fishman Island and Punk Hazard, I know a lot of people rate it low, but These two arcs are very weird because they introduce a lot of good things, but they don't really do a lot. Like, the enjoyment factor isn't there, but the writing aspect, or I should just say what they introduce in general, is pretty good. We get the introduction of Momonosuke and Kinemon, we get Law's return, we get Virgo, we get Doflamingo, we get Smoker's return. There are so many people that appear here, but it's like, when you look at the overall enjoyment of the arc, it's just not there. But one thing this arc does do is it sets up for the future really well. But I mean, look, listen, when the enjoyment factor is really low, the writing isn't the best, but you're setting up for the future really well. I mean, look, listen, in my opinion, this arc has to be like a 4 out of 10. I'm sorry. The arc did do a little bit, but it didn't do a lot. Like, nobody wants to go back and actively read Punk Hazard again. I don't know a single person that wants to do that. I mean, look, Caesar's a decent antagonist, if you want to say that. Kuzan's appearance at the end of the arc was pretty good. Like, there are a lot of things that it does do, but it just doesn't, I don't know, it's a weird arc. It doesn't feel like it grants anything higher than, I'd even say a 6 out of 10. The arc isn't that good, but it just brings in a lot of things that you're like, okay, I can see the story progressing forward. But aside from that, I mean, look, it's just it's a nothing arc. Like, I can just look at it and be like, it's a nothing arc. So moving on, we're going to go to Dressrosa. And behind Thriller Bark, I do believe that this is the most overhated arc in the entire series. I'm going to say this now, the arc is only hated because of the anime and because a lot of people did catch up to this weekly, so they hate it because they was having to sit through it. If that wasn't the case, this arc would be praised up and down. The arc does everything you want to do and more. I do agree there were a few slow moments, but aside from that, the arc was phenomenal, and I'm going to get into why it is good. We get Sabo's return, and I know a lot of people feel like he's just a shoe-in just so we can get another Ace, but I do like Sabo's character a little bit. He's different from Ace and he's different from Luffy. He's got his own little like thing that he does. Like, he isn't as brash as them. He's more calculated in my eyes, and like, I just like him like as a character. I don't like him more than Ace though. I like Ace way more, but he's somebody that's just like, okay, cool, we can get him on the team and he's pretty good, and he does bring in the Revolutionary Army a little bit more. We get Fujitora's introduction, and Fujitora is one of my favorite characters in the entire series. Like, I love Fujitora so much because he just gives that new flair to the Marines. We then learn about the underworld and how like basically everybody corrupt is tied to it. We see the sad factories that impacts Wano as well. Like, a lot of things that are shown here are great, and everybody's favorite part of this arc is Law's backstory, and Law's backstory is something I want to delve into. Now, although Law's character in his backstory was pretty good, I love Corazon, and I think that's why everybody loves his backstory. Corazon is somebody that everybody loves in this series because he understands how corrupt the One Piece world is. From looking at Law to then looking at his brother and just everything around him, he's like, wow. His whole journey with Law, him getting mad at people saying that they can't help him and whatnot, and like him being a celestial dragon like in the first place, and then seeing everything that goes on. Doflamingo's backstory as well, because it, in my opinion, is kind of like just tied into each other. I feel like, because once you start off with Doflamingo's, then goes into Law's, you then get to see Doflamingo's backstory previously and get to see how he was treated, and then you can see how a lot of people do have the debate on whether Doflamingo was born evil or if he was just turned evil. But in my opinion, you look at Corazon and then you look at him and you're just able to make that judgment yourself. This arc does so many things well. It makes the antagonist gripping because we get to see his backstory, we get to see why he is the way he is today, and on top of that we get all these other things as well. We see why Law is the way he is today. Like, so many things are shown here and it's just great, and the finale of the arc was great as well. I also love the fact that Fujitora's character gets shown here as well. We get to see why he's blind, and we get to see him argue with Sakazuki. We get to see him apologize for what the Marines and the world government have been doing, and just his whole sense of justice. It just brings his arc full circle, and everything about the arc with Doflamingo taking over Dressrosa and whatnot, a lot of people like to compare it to Alabasta, and I feel like because of Doflamingo's backstory, I do think this is better than Alabasta. That is the main reason I think it's better than Alabasta. Alabasta did a lot of things great, but with this, it has Doflamingo's backstory, you have Law's backstory, you have all these different things just tying into one. We have the underworld, we have so many different things here, and it's like, I don't know, like I don't know how people can hate on this arc. I think, as I said before, it's mainly because the anime is pacing, but aside from that, I mean, look, listen, if you read the manga and you read it with a clear head, the arc is good. Like, there's nothing bad with it. So personally, I would rate the arc a 9 out of 10. There isn't anything bad about the arc aside from the pacing and the anime, and that's what I'm gonna bump it down a little bit for. But aside from that, it does everything really, really well. Now we move into Zou, and I know I didn't cover before that the groups did split up, but yes, the groups did split up. I'm going to cover Luffy's perspective and then move into Nami and Sanji's perspective, since I feel like if you learn it that way then it's just better. So the group leave Dressrosa and they end up on Zou, and when they end up on Zou they obviously run into Nami and the others, and that's when the news breaks that Sanji has left. Now in my previous video I talked about fluidity, and one thing I will say is that the Yonko saga was very fluid. Every arc just flowed into the next. It wasn't really like a stop and start. You can say that this into Whole Cake Island was a stop and start, but I don't believe so because of this setup. In this arc we meet people like Pedro, Carrot, Nekomamushi, Ino. We meet a lot of people, and we also meet the rest of the Scabbards aside from the ones that are on Wano, of course. And so when we meet these people, it's like, yeah, it's pretty good, and the arc doesn't really do anything wrong. A lot of these arcs don't really do much wrong. It's just the fact that sometimes their pacing maybe feels slow, or maybe the enjoyment factor wasn't there, but the pacing here was fine. The enjoyment factor was okay. Like, there wasn't really much. Like, there's nothing great about the arc, but there's nothing bad about it. So yeah, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. We did get to learn about Oden here, and we did get to learn about obviously the poneglyphs and everything else. So yeah, the arc was a 7 out of 10. There's nothing too great about it, but it did introduce a lot of good things. Now following up we have Whole Cake Island, and this is one of my favorite arcs in the entire series. The whole theme behind the arc, where it goes on to child abuse and it focuses on like personal issues like self-esteem and whatnot because of that, and just all the things that come from bad parenting, and just the arc is one of my favorite sort of like themes and things that it dives into. Katakuri, Pudding and Sanji being the main focuses of this arc in my eyes. Like, these three show what bad parenting or just like terrible childhoods can bring. But the mission of Whole Cake Island was pretty simple, just to rescue Sanji. But when they actually find Sanji, Sanji doesn't want to go back, and that is because he is reunited with his traumatic past. Watching Sanji trying to fight his past battles, it's really touching, because as you guys know, Sanji's one of my favorite characters, and up until that point he was my favorite character. So when I saw that, it touched me deeply. And when I got on to the rest of the arc and everything, and when he had that conflict with Luffy, and then you find out Pudding was going to betray him, so many things happened in this arc. Like, we then get Katakuri's backstory with Burley, we get to see how Burley and Katakuri interact, we then see how Katakuri loves to, or just wants everybody to see him as perfect because he can't have any weaknesses. All these different things, it's just so great. And obviously at the center of it you then have Luffy and Sanji, since obviously Sanji talks to Pudding and he's like, no, I think your eye's beautiful, and that's the first time anybody's ever said that to Pudding, and Pudding snaps out of all the things that was happening to her. But she obviously has that little, like, where she goes in between the different modes, where she's loving Sanji, then she hates him, and then the kiss at the end. Everything about this arc was just phenomenal. There's so many more themes I can go into, like Big Mom's terrible parenting does come from her childhood as well. Like, it isn't a thing where she's just naturally evil. She was a girl that wanted to be loved and loved all these different things, but as we saw, things just didn't pan out that way. One, because, well, there's a lot of dark things that I hear. Like, she's in literally a child trafficking thing where they wanted to put her into the Marines and then make her a fleet admiral or an admiral, or just like sell her to somebody. Like, that is some dark stuff that was going on. The way how Oda paints Whole Cake Island as this colorful place where it's all pink and nice and everything, but then when you look at all the undertones under it, you're like, wow, the arc is really dark. That is one thing that he plays on so well, and that is something that I feel like a lot of people just miss with Whole Cake Island. Whole Cake Island is a facade. Everything about that island is dark, but we don't think that because of the whole infrastructure and how it just looks really nice. Whole Cake Island is definitely one of the best arcs in One Piece. So with that being said, I'm gonna make it a 10 out of 10, especially with the fight at the end with Katakuri. And I know a lot of people that, I'm just gonna say it, a lot of boneheads will say that the fight with Katakuri is what carried the arc, but no, absolutely not. Everything else about the arc in terms of writing, I know a lot of people do feel a certain way about it, because I've heard a lot of things about the wedding cake and how they didn't like how the wedding cake was dragged on in the manga for so long and then the anime. But in my opinion, when you go back, and what a lot of people need to do is they need to go back and read One Piece, and I'm gonna say this at the end, but I'm just gonna touch on it a little bit here. One Piece arcs are way better, like you experience them way better when you just read them as a whole, like package. You can't read a One Piece arc week to week and expect to have a good rating. You need to go back and read it, and Whole Cake Island is definitely an arc you need to go back and reread. So I'm guessing everybody wants me to move into the Reverie next, but no. Let's move into Wano, and then I'm going to go over the Reverie with Egghead, since the Reverie is basically just all like laid out in Egghead, so I might as well just make it one long part in Egghead. Now I'm actually going to start this one off with Wano's rating, so I can then explain why I've rated it this number. I think Wano is a 7.5 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10, and I have my reasons for it. I know a lot of people are going to either be like, that's too high or that is too low, and I'm going to explain why I have it right here. The amount of times I've reread Wano in the past 2 years, I think it's been countless times now. I've reread the arc so many times because every single time I read it, I get a different outcome, and I'm like, okay, cool. And I read it for obviously different reasons. Sometimes for power scaling, sometimes it's just for the story itself. In the beginning, we're introduced to Tama, and we find out Tama does know Ace, and so that is pretty cool. And then Luffy loses to Kaido, and in my eyes, I think this was the foreshadowing that Wano was going to be long, but in my opinion, I don't think it was long enough, and I'm going to get into that in a bit. But yeah, this was just the best way to tell your fans, like, look, listen, this is going to be a long arc, so get prepared. Now this is where we enter the middle section of the story, and I think this is where the ratings drop for me. A lot of things happen here that is like, okay, cool, we get to see Zora's little adventure, we get to see other things, but for the most part, I only look at it for the Udon part. And obviously we have Big Mom coming onto the island. I don't like what they did with Big Mom. Like, Big Mom being a joke character is something that really aggravated me, because they gave us such a captivating story in Whole Cake Island just to make her a joke. I feel like the community, if the community went back and read Big Mom's backstory and then read Wano, they would feel infuriated, and that is how I feel. Big Mom is one of the better characters in the series in my eyes. I feel like her backstory was phenomenal, but they just squandered her. Obviously inside Udon we have Kid and whatnot. Just the whole story was okay, like everything was just flowing as usual. And then obviously when they break out of Udon, they defeat whatever. Luffy has that speech to Momo. Momo obviously does what he needs to say, and then we move into the Oden flashback. Now the Oden flashback is what really bumps us up a few tiers, and out of the flashbacks we've had in the story, this is probably the best one aside from the Kuma one and Sanji. Like that, like this lore, Sanji and Kuma's is up there. Like they're definitely like the big four that battle it out all the time. I think Robin's one is pretty good as well, and obviously a Brooks one, but those four, in my opinion, I think Sanji's one is more just personal bias because, you know, Sanji's my favorite character, but if you want to include Robin's one, you paint at the top 5. The enjoyment factor here, the writing here, and what it does for the story later, like the lasting effects for it, this flashback is phenomenal. It does all of it, and that is why I have no gripes with it. It's a 10 out of 10 flashback in my eyes. But then when we go back to the Onigashima raid, this is where I feel like conflicting things happen for me. Characters that did benefit from this raid was Sanji, Kaido, Luffy, and Momo. Yamato as well, but obviously I'm not going to get into Yamato just yet. I think Kinemon did get a boost here as well, but I do feel like if he did die in a raid, it would have been a lot more impactful for Momo, and it would have done his character justice. I think him coming back at the end is very like, I would rather he died. Like, I would rather him die and Izo live. I don't even like Izo like that, but I'd just rather like he dying and Izo lives, and that would be a fair trade in my eyes. But yeah, a lot of people did benefit from this arc, and in my last video I did talk about how the will of people living on even when they're dead is very pivotal in this arc, and this is what this arc does really, really well. Obviously we have Oden's will living on, but everything about this arc, it's like very like one thing's good, one thing's bad, one thing is good, one thing's bad. Like there's a lot of things that happen in this arc. And so I really want to talk about Kaido. Kaido is somebody that, I'm not gonna lie, I had a video in reserves for Kaido, but I feel like I just want to cover a little bit of it here. Now understand, when I say antagonist and villain, I view them as two different things. Like I see villain as more Doflamingo, while antagonist is more Kaido. I know a lot of people are going to struggle to understand that, but that's how I view the two things. I view them as two separate things. And so as a villain, I do believe that Doflamingo and Crocodile are better, but as an antagonist towards Luffy himself, I do believe that Kaido is the best so far in the series. I don't know if Emu or Blackbeard could top him, but right now Kaido is the best, and I think it's just because of his whole ideology and how he views piracy and how he just views legacy as a whole. He believes that death is the be all and end all, and he believes that yes, once you die and you get that great hoo-ha at the end, that is when you are known as a legend or whatnot. But then when we see how he went out, that it's really telling, and it's like Oda wanted to show him that Nah man, you're not getting that death you wanted. That's what Luffy gave him. He didn't give him the death that he wanted. Yes, he was beat by Joy Boy in quotation marks, but he wasn't beaten in that grandiose way that he wanted to be beat. He wasn't beat in front of everybody. He was just, oh yeah, by the way, Kaido lost. Oh, okay, cool. It wasn't like a thing where everybody saw it, like how Whitebeard was shown on TV and that's when he died and everybody was crowning him whatever. Like, it was just a death where it was just like, okay, you're off to the side, that is your story, it's done. And that is so great, and I feel like a lot of people do miss that because they're trying to be like, oh, it's meant to be grand, or oh, he should have had more. And I do agree with you that Kaido should have had a better backstory, but in the exact same breath, Kaido is woven into every single major event we've had in the series so far, and somewhere or another he's woven into it. And I feel like that backstory, we're gonna get it as time progresses. God Valley is a major one. We're gonna see why Kaido is the way he is today because of God Valley. Obviously, we learn about King's race and Lunarians. I do believe that King was a very bland character. For what he could have been, King could have been a way better character. I believe overall King was just like, his whole stick is just being a Lunarian. That is why I see King as. King could have been way better. Queen wasn't okay. He was actually funny. I do find Queen funny, and I do think that he's an okay antagonist for Sanji. I think he was just everything that Sanji didn't want to be, so he was like, yeah, let me get you out of the way. And then yeah, just everybody else on the island was okay. Like, there wasn't too many standout moments from everybody else, like in terms of Ryan. I think Sanji did have the best one aside from like Momo and whatnot, but yeah, the arc overall was okay. Like, that's why it's a 7.5 out of 10. Like, there's a lot of things that it does well, but a lot of things it does bad. And the length of it, this is something I want to have like a conversation about. I think the length of Wano should have gone on, like there should have been more. I don't know, like, I know before I did have a lot of things that I wanted to go on for longer, but I've like lost it now. But I do believe that it should have gone on for a little bit longer in my eyes. I was thinking that Oden was a perfect character introduced here. Like, there was a lot of things that Wano did well, but at the exact same time it did really bad. Another gripe I do have with Wano is Yamato. Yamato in my eyes could have been a way better character. I know a lot of people are gonna say, oh, but her backstory was great. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, what does she really even do? Like, I'm sorry, please remind me what she does again. So yeah, there are a lot of other things that I could delve into, but obviously, as you know, if I did, I'll be here for hours. So yeah, Wano was a 7.5 out of 10. And then, like, that, the rating is pretty fair in my eyes. And so moving on, we have Egghead, and Egghead has a bunch of things that I could go over, and if I did, as I always say, I'll be here for hours. But to keep it short and sweet, Egghead's writing, its overall enjoyment, and just how it wove into the story later, and just everything that happened here was great. It was phenomenal. There isn't anything bad about the arc. Like, I know a lot of people just say, oh, this, that, and the third. Listen, go back and read this arc as a full package. As I've said multiple times now, read One Piece as a full package and you won't be disappointed. You guys like reading it weekly, so then what will happen is that it will be squandered for you. Even at some point I thought Egghead was like a 7 out of 10. I'm sorry to tell you, but it's a 9 out of 10. From Kizaru to the outside world and everything, to even the Reverie, which I'm gonna cover now, like everything else, bro, everything inside of Egghead and even outside was phenomenal. I kind of say that reading it weekly will taint a lot of people's eyes on how they view the arc, but I'm telling you, read it as like a full package and you will not be disappointed, not one bit. And lastly, let's talk about the Reverie. And I know the Reverie is scattered throughout like Egghead and Wano, but overall the Reverie is pretty good. Like, there isn't anything bad about the Reverie. We get some really good lore drops and everything. It was just a good arc. The enjoyment was good since it was short and snappy. Yeah, I'll say Reverie is like an 8.5 out of 10. But yeah, there are so many things that the Reverie and Egghead did, like Kuma's flashback and everything. Like, there are so many things that I could cover, but as I said before, if I was to do it, we'll be here for hours. So to recap, is the One Piece Post-Timeskip overrated or is it overhated? I do believe that it's overhated, but it's definitely not underrated. I believe that people do have a sort of fair judgment of it, but I do believe that it is squandered because a lot of people do read it weekly and watch it weekly, so they're having to put up with the nonsense that the community portrays and then just what the anime portrays as a whole. And this is coming from someone that's heavily involved in the community, so I can just see that they're baboons. Like, the majority of them are baboons. Like, let's not sit here and lie. Like, the way how they react every single week and how they do all this stuff, like, a lot of things can shape how you view a series because of the community, and a lot of people think that shouldn't happen, but that's just how things are. If you connect one thing with another thing, you're automatically going to think of that one thing because of the other thing. And so if the community is bad and it's toxic, and so you're going to view it as bad and toxic, and that is how a lot of things have gone, and that is how Wano was rated, and especially Egghead, because why Egghead was being rated a 6 out of 10 we do not know. Yeah, that's all from me, man. I'm gonna wrap this video up because, as you can see, this is definitely my longest video. It surpassed the pre-time skip one somehow. I think it's just the Whole Cake Island waffle and the Wano waffle. When I go back and I view the timestamps, I'll know which one it is. I think it's Whole Cake Island. It could be Dressrosa as well. But yeah, yeah, the next video I will be covering on this topic will be me comparing pre-time skip and post-time skip. I will be putting the arcs, like relative arcs, up against each other. So like the East Blue Saga will be up against Fishman Island. I'm gonna, like, if there are, like, I know there are probably gonna be more arcs in pre-time skip. There might be. I think there are. If there are, I'm just gonna put them more into sagas. But I did do sagas for a lot of the video. Like the East Blue Saga was one saga, then I had the Alabaster, then I had the Giant Skypiea, then I had the Annie's Lobby and Water 7. That's 4 already. That can go up against no, but okay, yeah, that's just gonna have to be how it is, man. But yeah, that's enough waffling out of me because this video is way too long. It surpassed my other video, and this is a lot of editing. So yeah, I love you guys for the support, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.